Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of Calderdale Council's Cabinet, last meeting for 2020. Item 1 is apologies for absence. I don't have any. I think all Cabinet members are present. Item 2 is members' interests, and could I therefore remind members, if they have any interests, to either declare them now or at the appropriate item on the agenda. Item 3 is the admission of the public, and there are no confidential items, so it's not recommended that we exclude the public for any item on the agenda. Item 4 is the minutes of the Cabinet meetings held on the 9th of November and the special meeting on the 25th of November. Could I ask if there are any corrections or amendments to these? I've not been notified of any. Can I ask then if we're all in favour of approving both these sets of minutes as a correct record? I see those in favour. That's agreed. Thank you. So item 5 is question time, and I understand there are 2 public questions. So can I just check who's reading them out? Is that Ian?
Yes, that'll be me, Chair. Thank you.
So over to you for the first, if I may.
Thank you, Leader. The first is from Mr. Andrew Tagg. It's in 3 parts, introduced by the following. Considering the government's, and this is addressed to you, Councillor Swift. Considering the government's ban on the sale of new vehicles by 2030 with internal combustion engines and the recent demise of the diesel-powered car, question 1, do you accept that by incentivising the move to electric vehicles would have a larger impact on localised air quality issues than any other action? Will the Council, as others, such as Blackpool, have done, expedite this change by stipulating the use of electric vehicles as part of the requirement to operate taxis in Calderdale? Question 2, why is the Council still moving ahead with a road and town centre development plan which restricts the use of cars with the intention of improving air quality, which as a result of the government announcement are effectively out of date? And question 3, considering the above and the terrible demise of the High Street, do you now accept the Council should reconsider its traffic management schemes to bring them in line with a rapid change in car technology and encourage town centre car use, as this will help stimulate new business while having no adverse effect on air quality? Those are the questions, Leader.
Thanks very much. Although they're from me, they're addressed at me, there's probably other Cabinet colleagues who would have things to comment about them. I think a full reply will be provided in writing, but it's probably worth picking up 1 or 2 quick points. I mean, firstly, in terms of incentivising the move towards electric vehicles, there's already work being done on creation of charging points, for example, which Councillor Patient might wish to expand on. I understand that licensing are looking at the issues of how to encourage a shift amongst the taxi and private hire trade, both to hybrid and electric vehicles, and we'll include more details of that in the response. Clearly, it's important to strike the right balance, as taxi and private hire is both an important source of work and income in parts of the borough, but also affordable taxi and private hire is fairly critical to some of our residents as well. In terms of the second 2 questions about the road and town centre development, I think there's a couple of points about that. I mean, the first point is that I'm assuming Mr. Tagg's referring to the changes in Halifax town centre. I mean, the first point to make is that the changes are not simply about air quality. The clear evidence is, it's always difficult, but the right balance in the town centre is the balance between people being able to get into the town centre quickly, but then having a pleasant environment to walk around. And many of these changes are about how you make a pleasant and safe environment for shoppers. And that applies whatever means the vehicles in turn might be moving around for. Secondly, and I will double check the exact figures, but again, I think it's important to remind people that the idea that simply replacing all existing cars by electric vehicles will therefore solve air quality problems is simply not true. Deb's predecessor as Director of Public Health used to emphasise that actually a significant proportion of the particulates that are generated by vehicle traffic don't come from fuel, but they come from braking and tyre wear and other things. I'll check the exact percentage. So actually, there is more to this than simply the reduction of electronic vehicles. But I think, I'll say on both of these points, Mr. Tugg's question really suffers from labouring under the misapprehension that the changes to the town centre are simply about air quality. They are also about what a proper shopping environment looks like, and how you get the balance between people getting into a town centre and then people being able to shop and walk around and participate in town centre life safely without feeling threatened by cars in every part and every road. But we will put that into a fuller reply. Do you want to go on to the second question, Ian?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is from Mr. Michael Bradley. He asks, regarding household waste recycling centres, has this council considered amalgamating the centres of Sarby Bridge, Elland and Brighouse into one single, much larger facility upon the site owned by Calderdale Council at the entrance to Lowfields Business Park that is conveniently located off the A629?
Thank you. That's another one for a written reply, really in full. But Jenny, is there anything you want to say about that immediately, other than no?
Well, I just thank Mr. Bradley for his interesting idea. I'm not sure how far we can go with it. We are already, as members of the public will be aware, considering the future of our waste services. And I'm afraid that suggestion wasn't the one that we'd actually considered before, but we will, of course, have a look at it and reply to him in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that all of the public questions, Ian?
It is, Leader, yes.
Okay, so there is some time left for questions from members. Councillor Mrs. Carter, you've indicated in chat that you'd like to ask a question.
Thanks very much, Leader. I'd just like to actually just comment on and ask you a question around the press release that we were advised about as members last week. I think it was Tuesday when it came through. And the press release in connection with the A629 Phase 2 scheme purchases. I know it's a planning, I know it's an item further on in the agenda, which I'd like to ask some questions on further on in the agenda. But the actual press release just really doesn't bear any resemblance to the documentation that's been discussed tonight. And I think if I was just a member of the public and not actually looking at all the documentation that we have for the meeting tonight, I would be somewhat confused with the press release in the Courier together with an artist's impression of how things might look and showing a picture of Southcote Precinct. When the paper tonight is actually nothing whatsoever to do with the town centre itself and Southcote Precinct, which is to do with a compulsory purchase of the bottom of town, Discovery Road, and predominantly Discovery Road and Cripplegate. And I just wonder why that press release went out last week prior to Cabinet and actually saying that there is going to be a discussion that Cabinet has to approve key A629 Phase 2 purchases, when it really is just not at all transparent about what the discussion is going to be about. Now, I know we can blame the Courier on lots of occasions for doing things wrong, but on this occasion, we actually supplied them with the press release. And I do think that by the photograph that's there, okay, the Courier might have decided to put that in. It is just actually not very transparent about what the discussion was going to be about. And I just would like to ask you if you would agree with me on that point. And maybe in future, when we do press releases that are specific, that we actually ask the Courier to use photographs for the areas that we're actually discussing and not for something that is totally different. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Carter. I'll defer to Councillor Scullion on that one, I think.
Thank you. And if it was us who provided the photograph, I do apologise in advance for that. I suspect it came from a stock that the Courier had. And in fact, there are other artist impressions we have of the scheme that could have been used. So I shall investigate, Councillor Carter. In terms of the press release, it is difficult to get some of the complexity and detail into a press release and into those very small number of words. But I hear what you're saying, and we'll certainly look at that in the future in terms of whether we can link those things. But I hope that people's curiosity was teased, and they will in fact be listening to this to hear the detail when we come to that item on the agenda.
Thank you. I've not been notified of any other questions to Cabinet, so I will move us on to the next agenda item, which is item 6, equitable charging in community care. And I'll ask Councillor Metcalfe to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. This report follows a Cabinet report last January when it was agreed to proceed on a consultation process to consider the full removal of the maximum charge. Now, following the consultation exercise, this report outlines a further option that has now been developed, proposing an incremental uplift of the maximum charge from next January 2021, combined with the annual inflationary uplift of care costs from April 2021, which those are subject to future annual reviews. The proposal would align to the charging arrangements for residential care and ensure an equitable charging approach is applied both to residential and community-based services. Section 4 of the report details the background and current situation. Many councils already do not apply a cap on service users' contributions. Of the 5 neighbouring councils, only one as a maximum are higher than Calderdale's, and I understand that is also under review. Section 6 outlines the financial implications regarding this new preferred option. It states compensatory savings are 375,000 are required in 21-22 are required, which will be met by savings targets exceeded by the schemes listed in 6.3. And there's a table at the top, I think, of that page which outlines the savings, the income and savings. A detailed report back on the consultation process, which took place over an 8-week period between 24th of August until the 18th of October, is in section 9. The report in 10.3 mentions a recurring theme was the view that the removal of the cap was unfair in respect of paying for care. Several respondents felt that the nationally set means tested threshold of 23,250, above which the full cost of care should be reviewed and increased. I have to say I fully agree, and we've been waiting government action for several years, and many broken promises for this to happen. A very comprehensive equality impact statement EIA is attached, and if this option is approved, the EIA will be monitored after 3 months, I understand annually, and then every 3 years. The report sums up the key issues arising from the consultation. The first is a risk that some people may decrease or cease their care to avoid paying the higher charge. Linked with that, the second risk, it's more than possible that this would have a serious impact on a person's independence, well-being and safety, especially in the 80s plus group. And the reason, particularly those 2 reasons, and also in section 4 of the background, section 4.5 outlines more. So after considering the views of the consultation, the proposed more equitable option in section 5 is recommended with compensatory savings as detailed. This avoids a significant increase for those affected and allows a fair, more incremental process over a period of time. I'm aware that still leaves an increase in the maximum charge, but just to repeat my earlier comment, the overdue urgent national action is needed by government on reforming adult social care funding to assist vulnerable people in not having to pay these large costs from their life savings. I'll a little bit complex, I know, this report, but I'll try to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Bob. So can I ask Cabinet colleagues, first of all, if anybody has any question or comment at this point? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Councillor Mrs. Carter, you've indicated you want to comment on this item.
Yes, Chair, thank you very much. I've read the report and the appendices and the age brackets, and whilst I accept what Bob has just said, I note from that the majority of the 35 are actually people under, I think I've got it right, people under pension age. So it wouldn't be so much of life savings that was at risk here, but it is about life savings that my question is actually. Have we taken into account in the savings, particularly I think it's sensible for a couple of years, if not 3 years, the number of people that actually buy these increased charges would reach the 23,250, and has that been taken into consideration on savings? Because possibly year one, or even in year two, definitely maybe in year three, but even into year one there might be some impact on people reaching the savings level and then actually not paying the full charge and actually being assessed for a lesser charge. And I just wondered if that had been taken into account.
Thank you. Bob, can you help us with that?
Well, I think on that particular point, I might need to check further on that, just that particular aspect. But of course, obviously people as charges progress, people do get nearer using their savings to get nearer the cap. So obviously they are advised to contact and discuss this with adult social care as soon as they think it's suitable. And of course, these are monitored very much as we go on. And there's been very detailed monitoring of each of those people that pay are likely to be affected. So I would have thought that has been taken into account, but it's probably worth just checking through. I do understand your point about life savings and the number that applies this time. Of course, these do apply to people who aren't over 65 or elderly. They do apply potentially to younger age groups as well. But I think the particular point, perhaps just fully make sure, Councillor Carter, it has been picked up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Understand the point you're making. Not seeing any other indications on this one. As I say, this is quite a significant shift from the original proposal. So, so Bob, if you're moving the recommendations, can I see a seconder for those? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Scullion. Can I see all those in favour? That's agreed. Thank you. Okay, item 7 is the what we're just discussing this in questions. West Yorkshire Plus Transport Fund A629 corridor amendment. Councillor Scullion.
Thank you, Chair. This, and I'm sorry if there's any background noise, but the geese and the ducks outside on the canal are having a quacking competition. So I apologise in advance for any extraneous noise. Part of the reason why this is in front of you today is changed circumstances, as the report sets out. It has come to Cabinet over the period of, I think, the last 3 years, but there's a very significant change in the listing of the Hughes Corporation building, which was a bit of a surprise, and plans had been to demolish that building, to acquire and demolish that building. But instead it's now had to be incorporated into the plans and things tweaked and worked around that. So the report needed to be updated in various ways, but it remains a report which is about getting the powers to assemble the land for phase 2 of the scheme, the A629 road scheme. And as usual, I'll issue my health warning in relation to CPO. It's a strong power. And we try to make sure that land acquisition is voluntary if at all possible. And you'll see a mention of that in 7.5 of the report. Actually, negotiations with landowners have been going well. In some cases, it's really a very tiny sliver of land in order to have proper sight lines in terms of the road programme. But of course, that land assembly will take some time. This is a big scheme and it is over some years. The timing means that we will start on the western edge of town, where most of the land is already in highways control, and therefore that gives us extra time built into the programme in terms of the acquisitions. There'll be a consultation on this in 2021, and I can update in terms of what's in front of you in the report at 2.2 in terms of approval. and that's that the West Yorkshire Combined Authority at its investment committee on the 5th of November did approve the full business case. So those approvals are all in place. This is a West Yorkshire Combined Authority funded project. And I should perhaps just add, following on from Mr. Tagg's question, that in the period, I think it was 2015 to 2018, there were 185 collisions on the roads that are included within this scheme. So in the town centre area, 185 collisions. And 2 of those were fatal. 23 of them were serious and 160 were slight. So I would endorse what the leader said in terms of, actually, it's not just about keeping people safe, that's absolutely crucial, but it's also about keeping pedestrians being able to have a pleasant experience shopping and working and taking their leisure in Halifax. I don't think I've got anything else to add, Leader, but I will be very happy to take any questions, but it is a lengthy report, and I may have to defer to officers if there's anything too technical or detailed.
Thank you, Jane. Cabinet colleagues, any further questions or comments on this? I say, as both Leader and Ward Council, I'm pleased we've found a solution around the challenges created by the what we tend to refer to as the Hughes Corporation building, and found a way of working the scheme around that site. Finding a long-term use for the building itself might be an interesting challenge for the future, but I'm pleased that it means the scheme can go ahead. Not seeing any cabinet members want to contact at the moment. Councillor Carter, you've indicated in the chat that you'd like to comment.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I have a few questions, but I'd like to comment as well, if that's possible. Can I just pick up on something Councillor Scullion's just said about the accidents and what this is about, and pedestrian safety? And I know it's accessibility between the railway station and the bus station and into town. But I think I need to clarify what we are going to do and how we're going to change things, if that's at all possible. I can't remember just how far back it goes when you had road signs that had a black and white banding across the top, which indicated Ring Road. I guess it was ever since I passed my driving test, and that was in 1967. So I guess for a long time. So the Ring Road, the wonderful Ring Road that Halifax had, and still has, I guess, is the road that we're talking about, from Huddersfield Road down and past the railway station and round the back and up Charleston and out, and was classified as a ring road forever, and I think is still classified as a ring road, if my memory serves me right, on the signage. And I think this is where the problem arises for me, that the juxtaposition between, is this a ring road or is it a gateway for pedestrians and cyclists into the town? And I think that's where there's going to be a difficulty with how we look at all this. But my next point, if I can, my concerns really, I understand the quandary that's been faced by the listing of the Hughes Corporation, and I guess we ain't going to buy a listed building, which makes a great deal of sense. But I assume from reading all the documentation that the listed building as the Hughes Corporation will then still be in the ownership of the person who owns all the land shown on the map in pink, which is surrounding it, which is the car park areas, which are under compulsory purchase order, together with Discovery Road. And that is where I have a concern, because I'm finding it very difficult to isolate a listed building. If it's stuck in the middle of a scheme where there is no accessibility by vehicles, by vehicular accessibility, because we are taking all the car park and all of Discovery Road, then how on earth can this building be maintained? And if it's going to be used for something other than kept as a monument, then there needs to be some accessibility for the landowners. And that is a concern for me, because what I don't want to do is end up with a situation that we've got at the other side of the road, a bit further on, actually facing the scheme that we're looking to buy at Church Street, which is at the bottom of Deal Street, which is the monstrosity of a mill that's falling down, and where we can't find a landowner that's prepared to take on the responsibility of maintenance. And I would hate us to have an issue with the Hughes Corporation that means that with a listed building in the middle of this scheme that nobody can get access to because there is no vehicular accessibility. And there'll be nowhere else to park either in the vicinity. And that is, yeah, I know there's Eureka car park, but that is a concern for me as to how that building can have maintenance. And looking at it at the moment, it might need in the near future some roof work and things doing to it. And I don't know how that had happened when all this was in place. So that is really a concern for me as to that bit. I've no issues with the rest of the document, except that can I just make a plea? I mean, whether it'll happen or not, I don't know. But that we don't, because we're actually getting rid of certain bits of land, gasworks land. I mean, I know we haven't got the gasometers on there like we used to do, like I was brought up with, but it might be nice if we could maintain some sort of links with the past and say what these are, and we don't lose some of these old-fashioned words as well of names of streets such as Cripplegate and places, which I think is important. What we must remember is this was Halifax. This bit of ground that we are talking about was Halifax. Nowhere else. That was Halifax, and that's where everybody lived, down that bottom bit. And I would hate us to lose all links with the past when we're looking at going forward. So, I mean, whilst I don't want you to call it Gasworks Works or something, but it might be nice to have some links to the past, if only on a plaque somewhere in among the scheme that said what all this area was and a history to all this area. I think could be really useful as part of the scheme going forward, so people actually knew that all Hebblebrook and Halifax itself was this little bit down here where people lived. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Scullion, do you want to come back on some of those?
I will try my best. Let me start with the question of ring roads. I confess that I don't know what the current situation is in terms of classification of ring roads, but I'm sure the officers do, and will be able to write to you and clarify that. You said, is it a ring road or is it a gateway for pedestrians, etc.? And the answer is, of course, it is in many ways all of those things in terms of getting around the town, particularly for buses, particularly important for buses. But also we need to balance the needs of all the road users. And one of the good things about this scheme is actually it provides external money for us to upgrade 13 junctions around that ring road that really, I suspect if you are a pedestrian crossing there and seeing the severance and the distance that you have to cross sometimes and the time you have to get across sometimes is a real problem. So we need to try and balance the needs of the pedestrians, cyclists and car users. And there's never a perfect solution, but I am convinced that the work that's been put into this actually it's a pretty good solution. Let me move on to the Hughes Corporation. I personally don't think it's a great building, but obviously English Heritage Historic England thought differently. And perhaps we'll try and find a way of members being able to, near the time, access the virtual reality piece of work that's been done in terms of envisaging how that actually might be set out and used. And I think you will accept that at the moment, if you're a stranger to Halifax and you come out of the raised bridge in the station, it's not immediately clear to you, do you go straight ahead, do you go right? It's the signage and the legibility in terms of how you access the town. Actually, I think a level of pedestrianisation by the Hughes Corporation so on will actually help that tremendously. It will draw you to that. And I think in terms of parking, the plans that there are, which are, I think, about to come out into the public domain in due course in 2021, in terms of looking at the parking for the station, for Eureka, etc., I think will solve some of those problems. In terms of the Hughes Corporation, yes, I don't want to get into talking about individual buildings and individual ownership of buildings and negotiations, because clearly that's a confidential commercial matter. But certainly we are very aware of those issues. But I think some of the station plans will help to understand the flow of traffic past the Hughes Corporation building. Initially, we explored the idea of perhaps just keeping the facade off it. But Historic England were not that keen on that. So it is the whole building that we are required to keep. And we are looking at the different options for that. Let me finally come on to the point that you made, and have to agree with you really. I actually have a great fondness for some of those very traditional names like Cripplegate. And in many ways, I would like to see them stay the same. But actually, I'm also conscious that, you know, my background and my history and my sensibilities and what I'm used to are seen differently by different generations coming on. And I accept that. And I accept that things do have to change. So I think your idea of having a little plaque somewhere that actually just touches on that history is actually a very good one, and we'll put something into the plans. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jane. Covered that pretty comprehensively. I'm not seeing anybody, not seeing anyone else indicating. So if you're moving the recommendations, Jane, I'll happily second those. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. So that then takes us on to item 8, proposed supplementary planning documents and consequential amendments to the local development scheme. And Councillor Scullion, that's back to you.
Thank you, Leader. This is by way of being a bit of a list, and it's actually going on to full council for formal adoption. List has been discussed in various forums, various formats, but it hasn't formally been as a list in front of members and then on to council in due course. It's basically alerting Cabinet to the need to work up more detail on these documents and to consult upon them in due course. And you'll see the full list. Some of them you will recognise because they have been discussed in great detail. There are things there that I think, as planning has developed, particularly since local plans have been being discussed in terms of particular design guides, etc., sustainable drainage, things like that, that are very important to us. There are already quite a lot of bits of guidance on those, but this list actually will basically pin them to Calderdale. So nothing to add. To that, I think Richard Seaman is on the call and can be called upon if anybody wants to ask for detail at this stage. But as you can see, it's a fairly general list, and Cabinet is being asked to send that on to council and for officers from that to be able to do further working up and consultation.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, can I just clarify that? So the amendment. This paper needs to go to Cabinet, not just the individual SPDs when they're done. Is that that we're saying because it amends the local development framework? Have I understood that correctly, or am I wrong?
Yeah, do you know, you've caught me out, Leader. I expect Councillor Carter to catch me out, not you. But I don't know if we need to take it collectively or we need to take them individually. I'll have to take advice on that.
I don't know whether Ian can help us on that one.
I think it's better taken collectively, Leader.
Okay, that's fine. So this is a recommendation to council. That's fine. Okay, any other Cabinet members with questions or comments on this at this point? Not seeing anybody. Councillor Lee and Councillor Carter both asked if they can ask a question on this. So I'll come to you first, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, it's about the local plan, this, and I accept that the agenda item is about supplementary planning documents. But since we're talking about the local plan, I think that there's some further information that I think we'd all benefit from. I don't think that in the local plan documentation there has been any estimates of the amount of prudential borrowing we're proposing to kickstart, I think is the terminology that's been used, kickstart certain aspects of the scheme. Now, the planning inspector herself has asked about funding. One of her responsibilities is to ensure that the plan is complete, and that includes how is it going to be paid for. And she has asked questions, as indeed have I. And I've not yet had back, despite my asking this on several occasions, had any response back from council officers. Now, my party, as you know, is very concerned about our ongoing ability to service prudential borrowing. We heard about it the other night. The local plan is a huge enterprise, as we all know. You know, the value of the houses in that plan is in the billions of pounds. So I think that in the interests of transparency, and so we all know where we're going, we ought to have an estimate of just how much prudential borrowing is going to be required. In the next item on the agenda, I have some other comments about the local plan, but I'll leave it at that. Can we please have an indication of the number that's involved? Because it could be a very large number and we all need to know where we're going with this. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Scullion, do you want to respond to that first?
Thank you. I'm very well aware of Councillor Lee's concern about these things, and indeed watched him raise these things with the inspector. In some ways, the question about prudential borrowing always has to be, and indeed I accept that Councillor Lee has raised this question in the past, which is, how actually are you going to pay this back? Where is the money coming from? Is this being paid back by the developers who seek to build the properties on these developments by way of roof tax, as is outlined in this paper, for example? The SPD will set out the mechanism for implementing the roof tax arrangements set out in the infrastructure delivery plan that already exists. So I'm very happy to provide a full written answer in relation to that, in relation to the SPD. But in terms of the general point that Councillor Lee is making, I refer him once again to our internal auditors. If he has concerns, then take them to the internal auditors and have a response from them.
If I may just come back briefly.
Just briefly, yes.
I've heard replies like that every time I ask the question. I am a member of the audit committee. I do know about financial issues. It is indeed about our ability to repay. And I would remind Councillor Scullion, in the last report we considered, we were paying £4 million in interest charges and we made hardly any repayments of the capital sum owed, which is £116 million. So yes, I'm very worried about our ability to pay it back. And I would remind you that the question was a simple one. Let's have an estimate of what we plan to borrow, please. I don't want to hear the rhetoric anymore. Just let's do it. And the idea of writing to the audit committee is ridiculous. We're talking about a moving thing here with this local plan. Just let's have an estimate so we know what's going on, please.
Thank you. Councillor Dacre, you asked to come in on this point.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I appreciate that Councillor Lee doesn't like us telling him the same things over and over again, but I think it is necessary because people who might be watching this need to know that Councillor Lee raised these concerns about prudential borrowing recently. And I said then, and I'll say again, that SIPFA have said that as a proportion of our budget, our interest payments are the third lowest of all metropolitan districts, and our external debt is the second lowest. So we always should be careful about our debt, but there should not be people should not be under any illusion that we are unable to pay it. It is a very low proportion, and we are able to pay it. And I'm sorry if Councillor Lee doesn't like to hear these answers, but they are the case. And just raising alarmist allegations about our inability to pay is unhelpful and inaccurate.
Leader, just reiterate the question. I'm not questioning our ability to pay. The question is, what do we expect to borrow? It's dead simple. And you know, there's something wrong if these senior cabinet officers can't give a simple answer to a simple question: how much? I don't want to hear the rhetoric.
I think Councillor Lee, well, don't want to get into a lengthy further debates about prudential borrowing, but I do think it is important to emphasise that the local plan as a development plan sets out what development will be allowed. It doesn't guarantee that all of that development will happen. For that development to happen, it clearly will require various investments in infrastructure. It's not necessarily clear what or if any of those will require prudential borrowing. Highway schemes, for example, traditionally have largely been funded through the regular LTP allocation, in more recent years through a whole range of different infrastructure grants from central government. Schools similarly likewise tend to attract specific funding. And as Councillor Scullion has said, one of the important parts of the SPD is one setting out what the obligations will be on developers to contribute towards infrastructure. So I do think you're actually posing a question which is not capable of answering, because it depends on the time in which particular sites come forward for development by particular developments, and the negotiations that take place with them about the infrastructure and how they're going to be met. But can I move on to Councillor Carter's question, because she has been waiting patiently?
Thank you, Leader. Not sure how to phrase all this, because it is a complex area. But we're looking in this paper about proposed supplementary planning documents in connection with the local development scheme, and holding consultation. If these go through council, we're holding consultation on them next year. So the timescales on next year would be useful. At what point of the year do we think that those consultations will take place, and when will they be finalised, to know that that is part of the supplementary planning documentation? But what concerns me is, are there any more supplementary planning documents going to be in the pipeline, and when are these going to take place to satisfy all the things that are mentioned within the infrastructure development plan? Because it really hit me when I read this paper that the consultation was going to take place in 2021. And I mean, if it's not finalised till late 2021, then where does that sit with regards to the rest of the infrastructure that is going to be required to satisfy the local plan? Because some of this will have to be in place before anything else can happen. The road through Bailiff Bridge into Brighouse, or that 641 Core Plus programme, the majority of that will have to be put into place before you can even start on a lot of the development that's going to, if that happens in Brighouse. There is the education element and the school requirements. There's the A58 and the A629 corridor improvements. And I'm getting to the stage now where I'm getting a little bit concerned that when is everything going to kick off to enable that plan to work? Because if we don't get the infrastructure in place first, then we're going to be in a real mess. If we're going to have something happening and some development going on, and there's no infrastructure on the ground to satisfy that. And I'm it might be me that's missed out on where, because of everything getting delayed backwards and backwards and backwards. It might be me that's missed out when we're looking to do these things. But one of the other things that concerns me within the infrastructure development plan is the lack of detail when it comes to looking at the SDP and going forward. For example, the waste management, which is at 4.4.1. I mean, you couldn't get much briefer than this if you tried. Waste arising in the borough is expected to be handled in close proximity to where it arises in the first instance. It is, however, recognised that waste requiring specialist treatment processes and disposal will often involve waste being transported across the borough and county borders. The distance travelled by waste are often dependent on contracts outside of the influence of the planning system. Whoa, that is a bit airy-fairy, to say the least. What on earth are we saying in there? You know, how are we going to deal with it? What are the differences going to be? It's going to be mega different when you get a lot of housing in Brighouse, if that goes through in the plan, and it's going to be at the wrong end of the, totally different end of the borough to where other operations do currently take place. And I'm just wondering, which is what's concerned me about, when is the infrastructure development plan going to have a little bit more meat on the bones if it's not got to go through an SDP process? And sorry, I sound like a bit of an old bag again, I guess, but I really would like to have a bit of clarity, because I don't think we have any clarity here, really. I think sometimes we've lost clarity altogether with this local plan dragging on like it has been doing. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scullion. I'm batting that one back to you.
What did she say? Thanks very much. I really appreciate you giving it me to do.
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that. Fortunately, I was muted, Councillor Carter. SPDs are not legally required as part of the local plan, but they are good practice in terms of developing. Within this, for example, there's information about how we should be working up something which encourages self-builders and plots for self-builders. And I think getting varied schemes over the life of the 10 to 15 years of the plan, actually, there are a number of things that we will be doing. I'm conscious that the precise question which Councillor Carter raised in terms of the infrastructure and getting everything in place before developers come in and build the first house, because we're not building the houses, in terms of what happens in the first 5 years, is something that Richard Seaman, as the head of strategic planning, actually addressed in the inspector's examination. Chair, and I don't know if you want Richard just to say something quickly about that infrastructure point that he's already addressed in the local plan examination.
I mean, I'm willing to ask him to do very briefly, although it's not kind of directly what's in the paper. But yeah, Richard, can you give a very quick summary of what you said on this?
Yes, thank you. I mean, just in terms of SPDs, it's important to stress that SPDs they're not policy. They don't make policy and they don't allocate sites. They're really about helping to implement the local plan and helping the council to take decisions. On the issue of infrastructure, and the infrastructure delivery plan is something that's not it's not directly related to this report and the various SPDs, but we did have some very detailed discussions about infrastructure at the hearings, and pleasingly, the inspector actually said at the mop-up session that she commended the council on the evidence we'd submitted, but she's raised some very specific issues around transport evidence in particular, which we are responding to. I think the issue is that I think when someone comes in from outside, it can be very difficult to read across between several different documents. So we have provided the inspector with a table that brings all of this transport evidence together. I don't think that's actually being publicly released as yet, because I think the inspector will want to review it before she decides that that it can go on the examination library for public review.
Thanks. That might be a useful thing to share when when it's been agreed, which
Yes.
with the inspector,
Yes.
which would probably help answer some of Councillor Carter's questions about the phasing and timing of particular schemes as well.
Yeah.
Which I do understand is challenging.
Can I just come
Just
back
briefly,
on
Councillor Carter.
on one thing there?
Yeah.
Whilst I accept that SPDs are not policy, and I accept that the infrastructure plan in itself as a document was a good document, despite the fact that it is, in my opinion, lacking on some detail. I do think that the whole thing goes together, because without the SPDs and without the infrastructure plan, how can you plan how you're going to release land? Because you are struggling a little bit when it is so detailed and so involved, and so many things on highways, schooling, doctor surgeries. That infrastructure plan is a very, very big operation that the area needs, that the borough needs to be able to get the local plan up and underway. And that is where my concerns arise. Whilst in real terms, the document might be a good document, I've no issue with that. But when you're looking at roof tax and you're referring it to the infrastructure development plan, then I think, you know, that it ought to be a bit more clear. If you put in an SPD out for consultation that refers to the infrastructure development plan, then I think there ought to be a bit more clarity as to how you expect the two to sync together. Anyway, okay, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, no doubt that will be picked up when we actually see the draft SPD on that one. So there'll be another opportunity to revisit that, no doubt. Councillor Scullion, is there anything you want to add in summing up? Okay, I'm taking it that you've moved the recommendations. Can I see a seconder for them, please? Thank you. Yeah, okay, I'll second them. Can I see those in favour? Thank you. That's agreed. Bear with me. So that brings us on to item 9, which is the half-yearly performance review report. And Councillor Dacre, can I ask you to introduce?
Yes, thank you, Leader. So as our colleagues will know, and as I'd like to tell those out who are watching us, Calderdale is committed to delivering its services effectively and in budget, and in doing that by reference to our 3 priorities of thriving towns, reducing inequalities and dealing with the climate emergency, and also by reference to Calderdale's Vision 2024. And to assist us and to measure our progress towards those overall aims, we benchmark ourselves against the other northern boroughs, and we use a number of key performance indicators to do that, and in particular 16 super key performance indicators. And we think this provides an open and transparent way to measure our progress, and also for our residents to be able to measure our progress. And at the moment, we are 6th out of 20 of the northern boroughs, and that compares to at the end of the full year 2019-20, we were 8th. There are 2 areas that I'd just like to highlight where things are going well for us, and that is in relation to excess weight and childhood obesity, where we have improved our standing in both of those areas. And we have, in fact, improved quite dramatically in the children from the age of 4 to 5 years, where we have excess weight has gone down to such an extent that we have moved up on the table from 16th to 5th, which I think is an outstanding achievement. In slightly older children, 10 to 11, we've moved again from 8th to 4th. So not only is that good for us as a borough to be able to say we've achieved that, but in particular, it's excellent news for those children who now have much better life chances. I think it's accepted that once you're overweight as a child, it can have lifelong impact. And so it's really important to prevent that excess weight happening in very early years. A further good news story is in relation to our waste and recycling and food recovery. That's the proportion of recycling as opposed to the proportion of waste has been getting better over the last 4 years. So we are collecting more recycling and less unrecyclable waste, and our food recycling is also picking up. So that's really good, because none of us want to be putting more and more into landfill, and indeed that's becoming more and more difficult to do. So we have to keep on improving on that. And at the moment, we are 7th out of 20 for our residual waste. But when you actually look at the detail on that, we probably should be slightly better, because we are slightly better because some of the authorities we're compared to don't count their residual waste that goes through the household waste recycling centres. However, there are obviously some aspects of the report that are of concern, and in particular, it's employment rates. They have been lower than some of the comparators, and our claimant rate has been higher. And unfortunately, since the beginning of this year, and probably presumably related to COVID, our unemployment rate has increased from 3.4 to just under 7%. And what's particularly concerning about this is that it's highest amongst the young working age population, so 16 to 24. And also of note and concern is the fact that within that age group, women are worse off than men, are more disproportionately represented. That is obviously a very big concern for us as a council, because it goes against those priorities that I mentioned of thriving towns, reducing inequalities. And so we are determined to work to try to improve the chances of those people, those young people, and all those who have had to start claiming unemployment benefit in the last few months. And the report sets out in some detail what work has been done across the borough to try to improve employment prospects, and also what we hope to do in the next year to help with that. It's been a very challenging period because of COVID. There's obviously been sad loss of life. There's been adverse impacts on people's health, both physical and mental health. There's been huge economic destruction, the devastation of livelihoods, and it's not over yet. There's an awful lot to work on, but I think the council can be congratulated in having been able to maintain its performance overall during that period. And we will obviously carry on trying to build on progress so far. So the recommendation, colleagues, is to note the report, to note the actions being taken, both to maintain and to improve performance, and to deal in particular with those areas where the council is not doing as well as we would like at the moment.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Councillor Scullion, I think you wanted to come in.
Thank you, and thank you for that report. I always really, with any report that's based on statistics, want to issue a health warning or a caveat, which is, of course, there's a time lag in many of the statistics in terms of when we collect them. You know, is it an annual figure or is it monthly, or and 4.6 does pick that up. I think in terms of the residual waste figure, I think actually the first 6 months of this financial year will actually include some figure relating to flooding in the Upper Valley and the Lower Valley, because we did actually take really quite a lot of waste as people cleared out the houses after the flooding. So I think we're going to see some lagged data having an impact on the figures as we go forward. I think the other thing to say is that in some ways I'm surprised that the physical activity rate of adults, as I think it's a self-reporting measure, has gone down, because I do think actually in the very first lockdown, people did make an effort to take up physical activity. And I wonder if the incidence of meetings on Zoom and things like that have meant that actually people feel less able to go out and to take physical activity. And we've got some money from Sport England in terms of the active Calderdale work, but clearly we're going to have to put a bit more effort into it in terms of getting physical activity into people's daily lives and improve both physical and mental well-being through that way. Just those comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Just looking at any other cabinet members. I've got Councillor Wilkinson. Before I come on to other.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I also just wanted to welcome the really excellent progress that we've made on childhood obesity at both age ranges. I think that's really excellent that's happened, so that we've turned it around so quickly, and hopefully that improvement will continue. And also just acknowledge the improvement in the good level of development at foundation stage as well. I think we know we've got work to do with early years, and we've set up the starting well board. And I think, you know, we've got more work to do in closing the gap with the children from the most deprived backgrounds and those with special educational needs. But I think, you know, it seems that we are making good progress, so that's pleasing to see. And just finally, also maintaining our position as second place for the Progress 8 score, I think is also excellent news. So I think clearly there are some areas in the report that we've got work to do, but I think there's others that we can be pleased with as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Wilkinson. Okay, not seeing any other cabinet members, so I'll come to Councillor Lee now.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I share Councillor Wilkinson's enthusiasm for the good things that we've heard. Absolutely great. I totally agree. There are some bad things in this report, and we need to think about the bad things just as much as we think about the good things. The corporate performance framework is a very valuable tool that we all need to use to run things. And whilst Councillor Scullion doesn't appear to appreciate statistics, we need to appreciate the statistics, whether they're good ones or bad ones. And we need to try to do something about the bad ones. I'm sure we'd all agree on that. So I picked out in the summary and recommendations on paragraph 12.2, right at the very end. If I may, I'll just paraphrase a couple of sentences in that I'm concerned about. It was actually mentioned by Councillor Dacre a few minutes ago. It says, there are, however, other areas of deep concern, particularly in respect of the economic and well-being impact of the pandemic on our residents and business community in the months and years to come, e.g. in relation to employment rates. In Calderdale, we have identified this as significant risk to our future ambitions and residents' lives. Okay, so it's been recognised in the report, and it is a good report. But, you know, we can't get away from that caution, and Councillor Dacre has already noted that it is something that we should be aware of. But, Leader, I did say earlier I would come back to the local plan, and this is where I do come back to the local plan. We've got a situation where we've got unemployment the highest in the region. Thousands of people are in need of a job. And the assumptions lying behind that corporate plan thinks whatever that number is, we'll need 30,000 more people inwardly moving into Calderdale to take up employment prospects, which are not apparent right now. Neither are they apparent in any of the numbers that have been justified in the plan. We've just had assumptions that are grossly exaggerated. And those assumptions are assuming economic growth in Calderdale, which is about twice the rate that most financial analysts are saying is likely to be the case in the next 5 to 10 years. So, you know, we've made ambitious assumptions, and I have to say I have great concern about those assumptions, because if they're twice what they should be, then then it's calling for 15,000 houses to be built, which might only need to be 7,500 houses to be built, predominantly on green belt land, which will be gone forever. And I have very great concerns about this. As I mentioned before, our ability to pay any money that we might be borrowing and service the debt, more importantly than just the interest. And so we heard earlier, we can't even estimate the costs of this plan, yet the plan is robust enough to enter into all of the commitments that we've been talking about in these second series of hearings about the plan. So we're going into the minutiae, but we've not settled on what the overall grand plan and exposure to costs this will be. And so I'm very concerned, as the report says, in our ability to realise our future ambitions when we're making long-term plans which don't appear to make any sense and could land us in massive debt. Thank you, Leader.
Just lost my microphone button. Councillor Dacre, Councillor Scullion, anything you want to respond to there?
Well, I think Councillor Scullion and yourself, you've already dealt with the issues about the predictions and how they can't be made at this stage. I suppose I'd just like to say that, well, one, we are looking at how we work with the unemployment, and obviously we want to improve that position, and the report refers to things like the Inclusive Recovery Coordination Group, which will be looking directly at how we do build our businesses back. And just in relation to this reference to the local plan and the complaint about all these houses being built, because ultimately a lot of the problem with the local plan appears to be that people don't want these houses being built. And I'd just note that I was reading in the Yorkshire Post of the 5th of December that Craig Whitaker was one of the Northern MPs who'd written to the government complaining that current policy does not assist areas like ours in building new houses, and things need to change because we need to be able to build new houses, new affordable houses, instead of them all being built in the south of England, which under the current funding scheme, about 83% of them are. So if Craig Whitaker recognises that we do need more housing in our area, I just think that there seems to be a disconnect between that and the constant complaints we get about the council wanting to build more houses. So it's not strictly in relation to performance, but it is just a point that I think needs to be made.
Yeah, I think it's quite a generous interpretation of what the report was about generally, but wasn't it really? But yes, okay. Let me bring Councillor Baker in and I'll think about anything further I want to add. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I think when all you have these statistical reports, we do have to kind of always take stats with a pinch of salt. And I don't think that shows a disregard for statistics. I think it shows quite a in-depth understanding of their nature, and also, you know, the nature of governance. And as you know, experienced councillors, I'm sure both yourself, Councillor Scullion, will be aware of the influence that having too much of a KPI focus can have on public services. I mean, we're all aware of, you know, the times where education was so KPI driven and health, and it can often have a distorting factor on the delivery of public services. It's important to remember there's other things out there, such as how happy people are, which isn't easy to measure in a statistical sense, although it is possible. So that's just one point about these kind of reports generally. I think it is important to mark and celebrate areas we're doing well and we're at the top, and you know, we can always strive for more improvements. But I think there's some things like our waste collection service which are pretty good and decent at the moment, and you know, that's one of the reasons why we've been keen recently to ensure that those services aren't cut or devalued at all, because at the moment I think it is a pretty good service people get with their recycling collections and glass and cardboard and all of that stuff, and that's excellent. Unfortunately, though, you know, there are some other areas in the report where there are needs for improvement, as you've identified. If you look on the council's performance dashboard, it's actually only 26% of all our total performance indicators that we rate ourselves green at. So I think any of us who would want to see a well-run council would accept that, you know, our ambition would be perhaps a more reasonable 50-75% green on our performance indicators, and then we'd be thinking we're doing pretty well. I think if there's only 26% green, we might kind of consider that things aren't going as well as we might like to hope. Of course, the challenges are for local government. You know, we all want to do more, yet our funding from central government keeps getting reduced, and we're trying to find out how to do more and more, quite often with less and less. And what I'd say to that is that we do have to focus on how we can have a bit more of a commercial approach within the council and look at ways in which we can raise our revenue and income, because without that extra power to spend and change things in local government, we're really going to struggle to meet a lot of these targets which we've set ourselves. Just a final kind of question and point really is around the housing issue. I raised this recently at the scrutiny call-in on the affordable housing issue. If you look at our strategic housing assessment, which forms part of the evidence base for the local plan, it says we need 193 affordable homes. It was updated in 2018. Yeah, our green target says we'd be green if we got 153 a year. So actually, even our target wouldn't meet the need which we as a council have identified in our strategic housing assessment. So perhaps we need to look at that target and set it even higher. Unfortunately, though, we're kind of red rated. We have been for numbers of years now, and we are unfortunately at the near the bottom of the league table with our comparative boroughs when it comes to affordable housing being built. I kind of had a look for the council's housing strategy. It ran, I think, from 2012 to 2017 is the one I can find online. So I wonder perhaps if leader of the council and deputy leader and a portfolio holder for housing would commit to look at housing and the housing strategy within the next year to see what we can do on a cross-party basis to address that issue. And perhaps we do need to look at our current strategy if it doesn't appear to be working, and see what else we can do to bring forward that affordable housing, because it is such a crucial issue in terms of tackling poverty and ensuring people have houses. There's so many people out there on the housing waiting list at the moment, and we're absolutely, if Craig Whitaker said we need more houses built in the north, we are absolutely correct. We do need that, and I hope we can get some of those new houses built in the right places and at the right time to meet that housing need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Colleagues want to come back specifically on that point. Yes, Sylvia, yeah.
Well, I wasn't going to come back necessarily on the affordable housing, but just a little earlier on. Yes, caution is always needed in relation to statistics. So, for instance, our crime rates have gone down, although so has everybody else's, and that appears to be connected to different lifestyles and so on during COVID. And we still apparently rated highly compared to some of our neighbours. But nevertheless, when I think it was the Police and Crime Commissioner did an overall survey of the whole of West Yorkshire, the answers they got from that were that still, whatever the crime figures were, most people actually felt that they were safe in their neighbourhood. So yes, I agree that there are times when the statistics don't show everything. And in relation to the waste service, you say that we have a good service, but one of the things that's been said to us as we've started to look into waste services, that apparently it would appear that recycling goes up if waste collections go down. So again, what might seem counterintuitive apparently is the case. So you do have to sometimes look behind all of these things. So sometimes changes even to something that's going well or appears to be going quite well can still make things even better. In relation to the commercial approach, well, one of the things that the scrutiny report that I was reading the other day into commercialisation suggested was that we needed to look more carefully at where we could make charges and and fees and collect these wherever we can. So I'm not sure quite how that fits in with the fact that we've now received a petition complaining about an increase in fees from yourself, Councillor Baker, in relation to parking. So it's all very well people in the scrutiny committee saying, oh, do this and do that to raise money. But when it actually comes to it, people don't always like the logical consequences of taking those sorts of decisions. And I think I wouldn't really have anything further to say in relation to housing. I don't know if Councillor Patient wants to come in there.
Yeah, I'll bring Councillor Patient in. I mean, I think certainly, updating that housing strategy document might be useful, although I have a suspicion there might be a more up-to-date one that hasn't been posted, but that's only quoting from memory, so we'll double check that. Scott, I don't know if you want to say anything about, there are a number of schemes coming through, but Scott, if you want to comment?
I mean, just briefly, I mean, thank you, Councillor Baker, for bringing that up. I mean, as you know, it did come through scrutiny the other week, and I think we were quite committed certainly with our partners from Together Housing, to come back to the Place Scrutiny Board early next year and to talk more broadly about our sort of schemes that are in the pipeline and the ability to develop a lot more affordable housing within those schemes. I think you're right, though. I think perhaps before the partnership existed and we weren't meeting our allocations right, and I think we've got the right sort of schemes in the pipeline, some of which are on site now, and clearly Beach Hill just about to start, and other schemes elsewhere across the borough. But I'd certainly welcome working with you and other parties in terms of developing that scheme more widely.
Sorry, yeah, come on, James.
Yeah, sorry, just on that, I guess it's a reasonable point. I say we need more commercialisation than I complain when you put up a fee. I guess my reply to that on the parking issue would be, I'm not opposed per se to kind of increasing the overall revenue from things like parking, but I do think you need to look at the fairness and the structure of the fees across the borough, and part of the nature of the petition is the way in which they're introduced only in certain towns and certain places at certain times. The other thing I'd say, it's the easiest temptation when you need to raise more revenue for fees. Local authorities do tend to look straight at parking, and perhaps some of the other more innovative things, if you look at like the LGA's reports on commercialisation that are out there, could be other things that we could do which could be of benefit to the people of Calderdale without just kind of going for the quick cash cow of motorists as the way of raising the fees. So I guess that would be my reply on that particular one. But we do need to look at how we can raise more revenue. We can't just get in this situation where we're constantly just looking to cut all the time of everything, because we're never going to meet all our targets if we just keep cutting local services.
Whoops, wrong button. Again, not going to get heavily into the parking. I think go back to the housing one. Of course, there is a bit of an overlap between the affordable housing and some of the discussions we've had about the local plans, because one of the challenges we've faced over the last couple of years is that we've struggled to insist on affordable housing proportions within new developments, because we couldn't guarantee the 5-year supply of 5-year housing supply. And one of the reasons why we need to get a local plan approved is to rectify that situation. Of course, we do also have a new development coming on in the Rastrick area, which also is it's not Together Housing. I forget which housing provider it is, which again will add to affordable housing numbers. So I do hope we'll see that situation improving over the next couple of years as some of those schemes start to come forward. Councillor Carter, you asked to come in.
Yes, Chair, thank you very much. My issue is it's within the document, the Appendix A, on the Bessborough in the North documentation. It's on the SKPIs. I know I've asked this question before, and I thought by now we might have managed to get it a bit better. I am not directing this at the council in any way, shape or form. But the problem for me is that we're trying to compare. It isn't as bad as apples and pears so much as different varieties of apples. We've got total crimes for 2021, unemployment rates for 2021 against the other data, which is going all the way back to 2016-18. Now, it doesn't reflect the society that we're living in. So if the crimes and the employment is as of now, then it would be more helpful if all the other data was reflective of, at the latest, 2019, but preferably the end of March 2020 or whatever, so that it showed a bit more about the society that we were living in as of now, instead of some of it being current and some of it being past. Now, I know Councillor Lynch shaking her head at me, and I know there's an issue, but you know, we're now living in the 21st century, and we have these silly things called computers that we're all having Zoom meetings on. Now, you're not telling me that we're having to go around with a piece of paper and a pen around every doctor's surgery and every hospital, picking up all this information about healthy life expectancy. I know we've to go 3 years with that or 2 years with that because it's the way that the system works. But I'm sure we could get a little bit more up to date with some of this information. I just wondered if we could have any representation on that at higher levels or some level of something or other, so that it did make it a bit more representative of the society we're living in today. Sorry, Chair, thank you.
As you say, Councillor Carter, I think this issue has come up before, and I'm sure Jez Roberts from Performance would happily give you quite a lengthy exposition of some of the challenges that we face with getting national data that's as current as we would like. But I understand the point you're making. I don't know whether Sylvia or Jane want to add anything on that.
I think just, sorry, Councillor Scullion did mention it at the very beginning when she referred to the different reporting periods, and it does make it very difficult. And unfortunately, I mean, I will speak again to Jez, but I don't think there is anything that we can do about some of these figures. They are just available when they are available, and we cannot, the council cannot speed them up. It's not within their gift to do that. And for instance, the one about proportion of older people in receipt of long-term adult social care, we know that's gone down, but we can't actually, the reporting period hasn't finished, so we can't rely on it yet. So it's just, we're stuck with it, really, I think.
The problem isn't usually our data, it's the comparative data that we need that takes the time. But I understand the point, and we map it as best we can. Okay, so at the end of all that discussion, I think actually the specific recommendation was to note the report at this point, which I think Sylvia's moved, and Councillor Scullion, you seconding, yes. So if I can see all those in favour of that, I will thank everybody. That's agreed. So I'll thank everybody for their contributions. I don't think I've missed anything off the agenda, and wish you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.